Welcome to Sherlock Shadow Channel, where every story hides a secret. Grab your coffee, sit back, and dive into a world of twists and turns. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let the adventure begin. Hercule Poirot and the Mystery of the Stitched Page. Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident. I shall never forget that peculiar autumn morning at Clarendon Manor, for it was then that my dear friend Hercule Poirot first became aware of a crime as singular as the man himself. The dawn had broken pale and mist-shrouded over the Yorkshire moors, the ancient oaks lining the estate's gravel drive glimmering with dew. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, had arrived by the early 7:30 express from London, summoned by a terse telegraph from Poirot himself. "Hastings, your presence urgently required. A mystery most extraordinary. Come at once. H. Poirot." On alighting from the train at Lanchester Junction, I was met by Poirot's immaculate figure perched on the station platform, his frock coat immaculate despite the damp air, his moustaches bristling with excitement. "Mon ami," he greeted in his high-pitched French lilt, "you are punctual. A good beginning." We drove in Poirot's little grey car through the labyrinth of winding lanes until Clarendon's turreted silhouette emerged through the fog. The grand facade of the manor was impressive even in mist, but it was the sight of Clarendon's drawing-room window, shattered, its lace curtains askew, that first hinted at the drama within. We entered by the side door, where we were met by Mrs. Farnsworth, the elderly housekeeper, trembling as she led us past the grand staircase into the library. There, strewn across the Persian carpet, lay the object of our bewilderment. A single page of parchment, torn from what seemed an ancient ledger, perforated along one margin and crudely stitched back together with coarse black thread. The stitching was uneven, as though repaired by frantic hands. Beside it lay a heavy embossing seal, its metal insignia embossed with the crest of the Clarendon family, a rampant lion and 3 golden crosses. Poirot knelt beside the page, his keen grey eyes narrowing. "Remarkable, n'est-ce pas, Hastings? A ledger page that should be safe in the family archives, torn and forcibly repaired." He traced the uneven stitches with one gloved finger. "And see here, ink smudges, as if wet when sewn. Someone desired to conceal what this page contained, yet lacked both time and skill to mend it professionally." I looked about the room and saw Lady Clarendon herself, standing by the hearth in her morning dressing gown of pale blue silk. Her usually composed countenance was pale, lips pressed tight. At her side, her son, Edward Clarendon, a handsome young man with dark curls and an anxious frown, tried to catch her eye but fell short, his gaze flicking instead toward the servants huddled in a corner. Lady Clarendon's voice was steady, though thin. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. It was just before breakfast. I went to fetch a book from the library for Edward's studies. I found the volume here." She gestured vaguely at a heavy tome on the shelf, "and noticed the ledger lying open. The tearing, the stitches. I have never seen anything so dreadful in my family's history." Her voice trembled at the last words. Poirot rose and bowed to her. "Madame, you can rely upon my discretion and skill. But first, I must know how many pages this ledger contains, and where it is ordinarily kept." Edward, stepping forward with a fidgeting air, supplied the answer. "The family ledger. It's kept in the strong room beneath the library. There are 3 volumes, one for birth and death records, one for land deeds, and one for the Clarendon family secrets, as grandfather used to call it." He laughed nervously, and either from habit or nervousness, sucked on his gloved thumb. Secrets, indeed, Poirot murmured. And it seems someone has seen fit to tamper with one. But why remove only a single page? And why stitch it back? One might understand destroying it, but to display it so, it is a puzzle. At that moment, the hush was broken by the approach of Mr. Barnaby Price, the estate's solicitor, a lean man with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous cough. He bowed stiffly. "Monsieur Poirot, I have just come from the strong room. The volumes are intact, save for this one page. There is no sign of forced entry to the strong room door, which is locked every night with 2 separate keys." "How curious!" exclaimed Poirot. "No forced entry, and only one page removed. The work of someone with access, perhaps." He looked around to gauge reactions. "And may I ask, gentlemen, whether any family member or servant had cause to consult the ledger recently?" Edward Clarendon cleared his throat. "Only my mother and I. We were reviewing some land deeds yesterday, but that was in volume 2. Mother wished to see grandfather's notes on the family mausoleum." He gestured in the direction of the old vaults beyond the gardens. "She borrowed the volume of Secrets and returned it. Last night. She left it on the study desk." A murmur passed among the assembled servants. Poirot raised a hand. "Madame Clarendon, did you notice the ledger missing last night?" Lady Clarendon glanced at her son, then back at Poirot. "I did not. I only discovered it this morning, as I said." Poirot stood contemplatively. A missing page concerning family secrets sewn back into view, with the family seal left behind. One might say it is an invitation to inquiry, to scandal, perhaps even to revenge. He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, I shall require your assistance in gathering the household. Everyone who had access to the library, the strong room, or the study in the past 24 hours must be questioned, and I must inspect the ledger itself." He picked up the stitched page gingerly, slipping it into a protective envelope. "The crime is not murder yet, but the theft of knowledge, and the perpetrator has left a calling card. We shall see soon enough whom it calls to." As we withdrew to commence our inquiries, the electric tension in the air was palpable. The great west window of the library now framed the gathering gloom of early morning. A dusty breeze drifted inside, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. I glanced at Poirot's profile, lit by the waning light, the small head, the gleaming moustaches, the bright eyes behind polished spectacles. I knew then that this affair, the affair at Clarendon Manor and its lone stitched page, would prove a test of the little grey cells unlike any other. And so, with that single, ragged scrap of parchment clutched in Poirot's steady hand, the game began. Chapter 2. The First Clues. I rose before dawn the following morning, haunted by the image of that crudely stitched ledger page lying on the library carpet. I found Poirot already at work in his temporary study, a small oak-panelled room overlooking the rose garden, his little grey cells visibly in motion. Over his perfectly folded newspaper, only his moustaches twitched with impatience. "Hastings," he said without looking up, "you must attend to the household roster. I wish to know precisely who entered the library or strong room after sunset last night. Discreetly, mon ami." I fetched the household log, a leather-bound book kept by Mrs. Farnsworth, and began to scan the entries. It revealed that the study door had creaked open at 9:17 p.m. and again at 11:03 p.m., each time recorded by the butler, Mr. Thompson, during his rounds. What struck me was not the times themselves, but the names beside them. First, Edward Clarendon. Second, no one, only a dash. I found Thompson polishing silver in the breakfast room and questioned him. He was a tall man, greying at the temples with spectacles that glinted when he spoke. "One of the maids was in afterwards, sir," he murmured, lowering his gaze. "Miss Agnes slipped in to fetch her shawl. I saw her return through the hall, but I did not record her name in the log." "Why not?" I asked, pen poised. He cleared his throat. "Quite simply, sir, I thought it needless. The maids come and go as they please at odd hours. Mrs. Farnsworth did not require strict records of servant movements." He shrugged, then added, "I can correct the log, of course." I thanked him and hurried to find Agnes Marlowe, the young chambermaid whose pale face betrayed a tremor of nerves. She stood by the garden door, staring out at the dew-laden roses, her hands clasped as though in prayer. When I introduced myself and asked why she had gone into the library so late, her eyes widened. I only went to retrieve my shawl, sir," she stammered. "I left it draped over the back of a chair when dusting yesterday afternoon." "Did you notice anything unusual?" I persisted. Agnes shook her head. "No, sir. It was dark, and I was frightened. The library is vast and silent at night. I did not see Mr. Clarendon, nor anyone else." She bit her lip. "When I saw the torn page this morning, I thought, what could it mean?" I ran straight to Mrs. Farnsworth. I nodded, though I sensed there was more she withheld. As I watched her retreat, I felt Poirot's gaze upon me. "Excellent, Hastings. A potential red herring, yes? A maid in the library after hours, but claiming ignorance. We shall note her as witness, but not suspect, yet." I joined him at his desk. He held the stitched page within a protective glassine sleeve, examining it with a jeweller's loupe. "Observe, Hastings, these tiny, semicircular indentations at the top, where the staple would have held the page in the ledger originally. They are uneven, suggesting that the page was removed forcefully rather than cut cleanly." I leaned in. He was right. One indentation was deeper than the others, as if pried with a small implement. "Notched rather than sliced," I murmured. "Precisely. And here," he flipped the sleeve. "Do you see this faint brown smudge?" He traced it with a gloved fingertip. "Tea or coffee, I suspect, spilled onto the page before stitching." The culprit paused, perhaps startled, while mending then fled, leaving the job only half done. "But why stitch it at all?" I asked. "Why not destroy or hide it entirely?" Poirot pursed his lips. "To attract attention, mon ami. To declare, I know what is written here, and I want you to know I know. It is psychological, a taunt. Our perpetrator is not merely stealing a secret, but playing a game." Our next task was to examine the rest of the library for related clues. We retraced our steps slowly, Poirot pointing out details I had overlooked. A single chair pulled away from the desk, as though someone sat and pored over the ledger. A small scrap of black thread caught on the edge of a drawer, identical to that used in the stitching, and faint footprints in the dust on the windowsill, suggesting someone had looked out into the garden, perhaps to ensure the coast was clear. "Footprints?" I asked, perplexed, but the window was locked. "Ah, but the catch is old and sometimes sticks. A determined hand could open it from inside. Note the way these prints angle downward. Someone climbed in or out, though I cannot yet say which." By now Edward Clarendon had joined us, summoned by Poirot's discreet messenger. He bore a look of strained patience. "Monsieur Poirot, what progress have you made?" he asked. The detective studied him for a moment. "Monsieur, I have found evidence that the stitched page was both read and replaced by someone well acquainted with this library's hidden mechanisms, but not necessarily with its books." He indicated a slender crack in the moulding beside the strong-room door. "Notice how the moulding bears a small scratch, as if a book was used to lever the panel." Edward leaned closer. That moulding conceals a secret shelf where grandfather kept his personal notes. I have shown only my mother that compartment. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Indeed, yet our culprit seems to know of it as well. Now tell me, Edward, last night at 10:45, where were you? Edward swallowed. In my room, studying. My mother and I have a joint exam tomorrow on local land rights. We reviewed Volume 2 late into the evening. And your mother? Poirot continued, arms folded. Lady Clarendon entered the library, calm but watchful. I was in the drawing room entertaining Mrs. Granville, our neighbour, over tea. We parted at 9:30. I had noted the tea-stained smudge earlier. Now I wondered, could it have been her tea? I interjected gently, Madame, Mrs. Granville can confirm? She hesitated, then said, Certainly. Mrs. Granville joined me for exactly 40 minutes. We had Earl Grey and scones. Very well, Poirot said. We shall speak with Mrs. Granville in due course. The hour was advancing, and it was time to call the first formal gathering of suspects. As we reassembled the household in the drawing-room, the scene of Lady Clarendon's alibi, Poirot handed the stitched page to Mrs. Farnsworth with an air of ceremony. Madame, have you ever seen this before? She peered at it, her spectacles perched precariously. No, monsieur, never. I would have known. It belongs to the ledger, where I record every entry of births, debts, and other matters. She drifted off, wringing her hands. Poirot nodded and turned to the assembled guests, Edward, Lady Clarendon, Mr. Price, Mrs. Granville, and Agnes Marlowe. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning we discovered that a page of great importance has been removed and crudely stitched back. Of course, it belongs to this family's private records, kept under lock and key. The question we must ask is not only who had the opportunity, but also who had the motive. He let his gaze sweep the room, lingering on each face, the anxious son, the composed matron, the nervous solicitor, the calm neighbour, and the pale maid. Somewhere among you lies the answer. But before we press too heavily, we must consider all movements after 9 o'clock last night. He picked up his magnifying glass and beckoned Agnes forward. Madame Marlowe, would you mind showing me exactly where you found your shawl? She led him to the west wing corridor. As he examined the coat rack, he nodded. Notice, Hastings, the fine fibres of wool have snagged slightly on the second hook, and here, he pointed to a small indigo bead on the floor, a fragment of someone's necklace. He pocketed it. An unclaimed clue. We shall collect more, but this speaks to someone passing quickly, perhaps dropping it in haste. As I watched Poirot's deliberate movements, I realized how each tiny detail, a smudge, a scratch, a bead, formed the mosaic of the crime. The first clues were small, almost insignificant on their own, but together they began to sketch the outline of a calculated design. When we returned to the drawing-room, Poirot called for refreshments in a manner that seemed entirely courteous, yet bristling with intent. Tea and biscuits, Hastings, he invited, for the nerves of all present. And so, over porcelain and polite conversation, the first clues of Clarendon Manor's mystery were laid bare, each morsel of tea and every fragment of thread promising to unravel the truth. The game was afoot, and the little grey cells were already at work. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. By mid-morning, the bright Yorkshire sun had burned away much of the dawn mist, illuminating the manicured lawns and rose beds of Clarendon Manor. Yet inside the house, a different atmosphere prevailed, one of tense expectancy. Having collected the shard of indigo bead and clarified each person's movements after 9 o'clock, Poirot judged that it was time to convene the full circle of suspects. We assembled once more in the grand drawing-room, the same space in which Lady Clarendon had entertained Mrs. Granville. This time, however, the mood was less convivial. Silver tea service gleamed on a small walnut table, its polished surface reflecting the faces of those present. Lady Clarendon, composed in pale blue, her son Edward, restless and pale, Mr. Barnaby Price, the solicitor, whose spectacles caught the overhead light, Mrs. Granville, the neighbour, demure in lavender, Agnes Marlowe, the chambermaid, glancing about with nervous eyes, Mrs. Farnsworth, the sombre housekeeper, and Mr. Thompson, the butler, standing by with impeccable posture. "Hear me, mes amis," Poirot began, rising from his seat on the leather-upholstered settee. He held the stitched ledger page in one hand, and in the other, the indigo bead. This morning's discoveries suggest a mind both cunning and theatrical, but we cannot solve the mystery until we understand precisely who you are and what you know. He set the ledger page on the low table and placed the bead beside it, like court evidence. "I propose that each of you recount, in your own words, your connection to the family and any reasons you may have to seek access to the family secrets." Lady Clarendon inclined her head. "I am Margaret Clarendon," she said in measured tones, "widow of Sir Rowland Clarendon and mother to Edward. My husband kept the family secrets, decisions about legacy, estate distribution, and restless matters better left undisturbed. I have devoted myself to preserving my husband's memory and protecting my only child from scandal." She paused, softening her voice. "I study these volumes because I believe that understanding the past will guide us to a sound future." Poirot nodded. "Madame, your motives are understandable. But did you notice any inconsistencies in last night's volumes? Any pages that disturbed you?" She drew in a quiet breath. "Only volume 3, the so-called secret ledger. I borrowed it to verify a clause about the mausoleum, which Sir Rowland added late in life. I confess I was uneasy when I found the page tampered with. It spoke of a foutoir entry I did not recognize, but I swear I returned it intact." Next, Poirot turned to Edward. The young man shifted uncomfortably. "I am Edward Clarence. Pardon, Clarendon," he corrected himself. "My mother and I study the deeds together, as we intend to expand the estate's holdings after the Harvest Festival. I would never interfere with Volume 3. My interests lie in Volume 2, land deeds and finances. Yet I am aware that Volume 3 contained references to a codicil in Sir Rowland's will. If someone sought to remove that, it would affect me deeply." He swallowed. "I had no reason to alter the page, though." "Very good," Poirot said, turning to the solicitor, Mr. Price. "Barnaby Price, you manage the estate's legal affairs. You must be intimately acquainted with the contents of all 3 volumes. Mr. Price adjusted his glasses. "Indeed, monsieur. I have read through volumes 1 and 2 in preparation for the annual audit. Volume 3 I review only when specifically requested by Lady Clarendon. If I am to be candid, I did once glance at Sir Rowland's personal annotations. He is known to have expressed misgivings about certain heirs. But I found nothing of immediate consequence, and I returned the ledger undisturbed." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Did anyone else here have cause to examine Sir Rowland's personal annotations?" A delicate voice answered, "Mrs. Granville, the neighbour, who wore a cameo brooch at her throat. I once borrowed Volume 1 when Sir Rowland was still alive to verify an old family anecdote he mentioned during tea. He had shown me a passage about our shared ancestor and a dispute over land. I returned it later that week." I never touched Volume 3. Thank you, Poirot said. He turned to Agnes Marlowe, who stood near the windows, clutching her apron. Miss Marlowe, you admitted to entering the library last night after hours. You retrieved your shawl, but did you notice anyone else there? Agnes swallowed. No, sir, it was dark. I thought I saw a shadow near the far desk, but I thought it might have been a statue's silhouette. I fled as soon as I got my shawl. She glanced at Mrs. Farnsworth. I did not see Mr. Thompson either. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Very well. And what of you, Mrs. Farnsworth? You oversee the household records. Surely you have intimate knowledge of these ledgers. The housekeeper cleared her throat. I record births, deaths, marriages, everything for Volume 1. I never delve into Sir Rowland's confessions in Volume 3. That is his private domain. Her gaze wavered as she added, I lock the strong room each night and keep the keys exactly where I should. And you, Mr. Thompson? Poirot addressed the butler, his voice polite but firm. You noted the library door opening twice after 9 o'clock. You recorded Edward's passage, but not that of Miss Marlowe. What did you see? Thompson stood erect, his eyes steady. I saw that Miss Marlowe left the library. I did not see anyone else. The second creak I noted was my own returning to the pantry. He signalled that his memory of the night was consistent. Poirot surveyed the group. Thank you all. I have now heard your accounts. Yet one question lingers. Who among you possessed both the knowledge of the ledger's location and the courage or desperation to steal a page? The removal of a single page, stitched back in view, suggests someone who wished to make a statement. Perhaps your motive is not financial, but psychological. Lady Clarendon exchanged a glance with Edward, whose knuckles whitened around the arm of his chair. Mrs. Granville's composure slipped for an instant, revealing a flicker of concern. Even the steadfast Mr. Price cleared his throat with unexpected haste. At this moment, Poirot continued, we must test the truth of your statements. I intend to demonstrate that some of you have contradicted yourselves, not deliberately, but out of hidden anxiety. After lunch, I shall re-examine the library, the study, and that secret moulding which conceals grandfather's notes. But before that, I wish each of you to remain here, where I can observe your reactions. He offered a slight bow. Monsieur Hastings, would you attend to the disposal of tea and biscuits? As I rose to carry away the tray, I noted the subtle relief on some faces, and on others an all too vivid sign of worry. The stage was set, the actors in place. Poirot's calm assurance masked the tempest of observation within, and I sensed that the little grey cells were already isolating the suspect. We left them to wait in hushed silence, the ledger page and indigo bead lying between them like silent judges. The game had progressed to its second act, the gathering of suspects. Soon Poirot's intimate knowledge of human nature would pit each against the other, and the secret behind that single stitched page would inch closer to revelation. This, I knew, was merely the beginning of a deeper, more perilous dance. Chapter 4. Poirot's First Impressions. That afternoon, after the household had dispersed for luncheon, I found Hercule Poirot in the library once more, standing by the fireplace where the morning's evidence still lay neatly arranged. He was adjusting a cushion on the armchair, his expression one of intense focus. Mon ami, he began, without turning. It is time I revealed to the assembled company my first impressions. For that, we must reconvene in the drawing room. Please fetch Mrs. Farnsworth, and ensure that no one departs the house. I swiftly carried out his instructions. By 2 o'clock, every member of the household, Lady Clarendon, Edward, Mr. Price, Mrs. Granville, Miss Marlowe, Mr. Thompson, and the housekeeper herself, had gathered in the drawing-room once more. They exchanged glances of fatigue and curiosity. One could almost see the cogs turning behind their polite facades. Poirot entered, resplendent in a charcoal grey suit and his customary bow tie, his moustaches perfectly waxed. He paused at the threshold, surveying the group as if viewing a most intricate clockwork mechanism. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm yet commanding attention, "I thank you for your patience. I shall now share my impressions of each of you, impressions not drawn from idle speculation, but from observation of manner, gesture, and circumstance." He placed a small, ornate box on the table. It contained the black thread and the indigo bead. "First, let us consider the scene itself. The penciled ledger page, torn and crudely stitched, was left displayed upon the carpet as a declaration. Someone among you sought not only to conceal knowledge, but to provoke discovery, an act both bold and theatrical." He turned to Lady Clarendon. "Madame, you wear pearls at luncheons, pearls signifying purity and elegance. Yet I noted this morning, upon our entrance, a single pearl missing from your necklace. That pearl was found in the rose bed outside the west window." He indicated a small glass vial on the table containing a solitary pearl. Lady Clarendon's composure faltered for an instant before she bowed her head. "I lost it in the garden when I leaned to examine the view. I did not think it significant." "Mademoiselle," Poirot continued, addressing Agnes Marlowe, "you spoke of a shawl retrieved from the library. Yet I observed that the shawl draped over the chair was not the one you wear when dusting. Yours has a distinct fringe, whereas the one left behind had plain edges." Agnes's lips parted, then pressed together. "I borrowed another maid's shawl last night. It was colder than I expected." "Indeed," Poirot nodded. "A small lie, but you spoke truth otherwise. Now, Monsieur Edward, I noted you fumbling with your gloves when I questioned you this morning. You removed them hastily, as though you had handled something you wished to conceal. Your gloves and the ledger page both bear faint traces of brown soil, perhaps from the gardens." Edward looked down at his lap. "I walked in the rose garden after dinner to clear my mind. I did not touch the ledger page." "Ah, but you did," Poirot said gently. "That soil matched the terracotta pots by the gardener's shed, areas you do not ordinarily access, and yet your mud spots align precisely with the angles of the west windowsill found earlier." He paused to let the implication sink in. "Mr. Price," he said, turning next to the solicitor, "you are a man of order, and your spectacles carry minute scratches upon the right lens. Scratches consistent with frequent adjustment when peering at fine print. Yet I found a second pair of spectacles in the strong room, identical but without scratches. One might assume you use them only for the secret ledger." Price's throat worked. "They are my spare, monsieur. I keep them locked away." "Very well," Poirot said. "A logical precaution, but indicative of someone expecting fine print to examine. Mrs. Granville, you declaimed that you had no interest in Volume 3. Yet I found your calling card in the library, engraved with your initials, beneath the chair where the ledger page was replaced. You dropped it when leaving." She glanced at the card on the table, her cheeks flushing. I visited the library yesterday to pay my respects to Sir Rowland's memory. I must have dropped it unintentionally." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "but why remove only one page? And why stitch it back into view?" He unfolded the glassine sleeve containing the page. "I have deduced that the stained smudge is not tea, but coffee, bitter, black, taken without sugar. Only one person among you does not drink tea." A hush fell. All eyes turned to Mr. Thompson, the butler. He straightened. I rarely partake of tea unless duty demands. I prefer coffee. His voice was steady, yet his knuckles whitened on the arms of his chair. Poirot smiled mildly. We shall return to you, monsieur. But first, consider this. The true purpose of theft is rarely mere concealment. It is to wield power over secrets. Each of you has motives, at times conflicting, inheritance concerns, fear of scandal, professional ambition, the desire for family approval. He paced slowly before the fireplace. Yet only one of you possesses the precise combination of access, knowledge, and dramatic flair to orchestrate such an act. And that person's actions suggest they wished to draw attention, to challenge the household to unveil a buried truth. He stopped, raising a finger. And so, the official theory that a common thief sought a valuable secret is flawed. Instead, we are witnessing the first maneuver in a psychological game, one that will escalate until the culprit is cornered. He turned to me. Hastings, bring forward the ledger page and accompanying items. I placed the stitched page, the pearl, the bead, and the calling card on a velvet cushion. Poirot gathered them and addressed the group a final time. I shall now inspect the strong room and the moulding I mentioned. In your absence, I require silence in the corridors. Do not converse on these matters. As they filed out, some reluctant, some eager, Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. You see, Hastings, the game is well underway. Each suspect has revealed a truth and a lie. Soon, the contradictions will lead me to the culprit. I watched him stride toward the strong room, confident and purposeful. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows upon the polished floor, shadows that promised darker revelations to come. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Late afternoon found Clarendon Manor steeped in a hush more potent than any expressed accusation. The drawing-room doors were closed, and the scent of fading roses drifted through the slightly ajar windows. Monsieur Poirot had instructed that each member of the household present themselves for private questioning, a task he entrusted me, Hastings, to coordinate. With measured steps, I guided the first interviewee down the dimly lit corridor toward the oak-panelled study, where Poirot awaited by a polished writing desk, papers neatly stacked, and a single silver candlestick flickering in the gloom. Lady Clarendon, Lady Margaret Clarendon, entered with the poise of a queen attending her court. Her pale blue silk dress seemed to catch the last rays of daylight, and her expression was composed, perhaps too composed. Poirot rose from his chair and offered her a seat. Madame, he began, his voice gentle but precise, you have already recounted your movements. Yet I must probe further. Your pearl, found in the rose bed, suggests you walked alone in the garden at an hour you did not disclose. He inclined his head. Why? Lady Clarendon's eyes flickered. She smoothed her skirt. I needed air. The stale confines of this house. I find them oppressive of late. Poirot regarded her calmly. Understandable. And yet the rose bed lies beyond the gardener's privy, an odd destination for mere fresh air. Did you there chance upon someone, or something? He paused, allowing a moment's silence. She lowered her gaze. I thought I saw a shadow by the west window. I feared intruders. I retrieved my shawl and returned inside. And the ledger page? Poirot pressed. Did you glance at it once more in the study? My curiosity was piqued, she admitted softly. I unfolded the page. I saw mention of a codicil that concerned my late husband's stipulations, an entry I had not noted before, but I did not remove it. Poirot nodded. You did not stitch it back? No, she replied, voice firm. He leaned forward. And yet you carried a small sewing kit in your reticule. Why, madame? Her lip quivered almost imperceptibly. To mend my dress, 'tis a thief of silk, this wound beneath the arm. He allowed a delicate nod. Very well. I thank you, madame. As she rose, her composure returned, but I noted a fleeting tremor in her hands. Edward Clarendon, next. Edward Clarendon, his dark curls mussed from the walk, entered with hesitant steps. Poirot gestured to a chair and observed the young man's posture, shoulders tight, head bowed. Edward, Poirot said softly, you confessed to strolling in the rose garden. You spoke of clearing your mind for tomorrow's exam. Yet you have no syllabus on mausoleum clauses, but you do on land deeds. Why inspect Volume 3 second-hand? Edward swallowed. I remembered a reference to an easement in the mausoleum grounds. My inheritance could be affected. I wished to understand grandfather's intentions. And yet, Poirot continued, you did not speak of this until pressed. Instead, you fumbled with your gloves, denied your soil-stained shoes, and omitted the shrubbery knock found on your study window. Why? Edward's eyes flashed. I did not wish to alarm my mother. I thought it unwise to trouble her with inheritance matters before she was ready. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Noble, but perhaps misplaced loyalty. And what of the hidden shelf in the moulding? You and your mother discussed its contents, did you not? Edward's throat tightened. She showed me a single parchment once. Nothing of consequence. Poirot tapped the ledger page. That page was once held here, beneath grandfather's notes. You peeked. You saw something, but you did not stitch it back. That was another's work. Edward looked away, lips pressed. I swear, Poirot, I did not stitch it. You did not, Poirot agreed. But someone watched you, perhaps, and emulated your midnight visit. Edward exhaled and stood. Thank you, monsieur. He left, with a curt nod, leaving Poirot to gaze after him. Mr. Barnaby Price. The solicitor, Mr. Price, entered next. His spectacles sat low on his nose, and he adjusted them as if by rote. Poirot motioned to a chair, and Price perched on its edge. Mr. Price, began the detective, you manage the family's legal affairs. You possess 2 pairs of glasses, one scratched and one pristine. Why? Price's lips thinned. My spare is for reading finer script in dim light. I maintain it untouched. Might one deduce, Poirot teased gently, that you do not wish fingerprints on the spare pair? Price stiffened. I am meticulous, monsieur, no more. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And yet you touched the ledger's spine last night, did you not? Your spare glasses were in use, for the scratches on the original match the impressions on the page. Price cleared his throat. I glanced at Volume 3 to ensure legal correctness. Mere professional duty. Professional duty? Poirot echoed. A most convenient alibi. But the ledger page was replaced imperfectly, suggesting the culprit lacked dexterity. Yet you are a man of precision. Price's hand trembled on his knee. I would not compromise my reputation in such a sloppy act. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps not. Thank you, Mr. Price. The solicitor rose, his face ashen, and departed without meeting our eyes. Mrs. Granville, the neighbour, was next to cross the threshold. She carried herself with quiet grace, her lavender frock catching the lamp's glow. Poirot studied her brooch, the same cameo he had found on the library floor. You dropped this, Mrs. Granville, he observed, placing the brooch on the desk. She inhaled sharply. I did. It slipped as I leaned over a book rack. But why question me again? Because, Poirot said gently, you claimed disinterest in Volume 3, yet your card lay beneath the chair. Why visit the library twice in one day? She smoothed her skirt. I wish to consult that ancestor's entry one more time. I felt I had misunderstood Sir Rowland's anecdote. That is all. And you make no mention of the ledger page's content? She glanced away. It seemed irrelevant. Such confidence. Poirot tapped the page. But every detail matters. I thank you, Mrs. Granville. She curtsied and left with a measured step. Finally Mrs. Farnsworth, the housekeeper, entered. Her hands were folded, her posture rigid. Madame, Poirot said, you keep the keys and the logs. You discovered the study door ajar, yet the log shows no record of Miss Marlowe's shawl retrieval. Mrs. Farnsworth swallowed. I instructed Mr. Thompson to note all movements. I did not question his omission. And the keys? Poirot pressed. They hang on this hook. He pointed to an empty hook beside hers. One key is missing. Her eyes widened. I misplaced it. I found it later in the pantry. Poirot leaned forward. A plausible oversight, but you have admitted to reading Volume 1 only. Did you examine Volume 3 after locking it away? She shook her head. Never. My duty is Volume 1. Very well. Poirot rose. Thank you, Mrs. Farnsworth. As she stood, I noticed her knuckles white on her apron. She bowed and left. When the final door closed, Poirot and I found ourselves alone in the study. The detective gathered his notes and placed each interview's memorandum in order. Mon ami, he said, we have witnessed a tapestry of half-truths. Each suspect holds fragments of knowledge, yet none confesses fully. The stitched ledger page beckons like a siren song, drawing the guilty toward exposure. Tomorrow, we pursue the false lead and the secondary mystery. For now, I require rest, that my little grey cells may work untroubled. I left him to his reflections, the corridors silent but for the soft echo of our footsteps. The interviews had begun, and with them, the suspects' facades showed cracks through which the truth might yet emerge. Chapter 6. The first false lead. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the manor's garden still sparkling with dew, yet an undercurrent of tension persisted within Clarendon's walls, as though each servant and family member carried a secret beneath their measured calm. After a light breakfast, Poirot and I made our way to the library where he intended to pursue what he called our first false lead. He paused at the threshold, hand on the doorframe, surveying the room with his customary intensity. Hastings, he said quietly, yesterday we discovered signs pointing to Mr. Price, his spare spectacles, the ledger's fine print evidence, even his tremor when pressed. Today, we shall follow that thread, if only to prove it will lead us astray. I nodded, understanding that Poirot often used apparent clues to flush the real culprit into action. We approached the desk where Barnaby Price had sat just the afternoon before. On the blotter lay 2 pairs of spectacles, one scratched, one pristine, exactly as Poirot had noted. Beside them was a folded letter, sealed with black wax, bearing the solicitor's signet. Poirot uncorked the letter opener and slit it open with theatrical care. Hastings, he murmured, observe the handwriting. The script was neat and precise, each loop and flourish matching Mr. Price's own penmanship. The letter was addressed to Lady Clarendon. Dearest Margaret, it is with heavy heart I inform you that your recent revision to the will may render the codicil invalid. I beg you to reconsider before signing. Time is of the essence. Yours faithfully, Barnaby Price. Poirot frowned, folding the letter neatly. A most damning piece of evidence, if indeed the solicitor sought to manipulate Lady Clarendon for his own gain. I peered at it. But why write such a letter clandestinely? He could have spoken to her directly. Precisely. Poirot said. He would not need subterfuge if his intentions were legitimate. Yet this letter implies coercion. Let us see how our solicitor accounts for it. We found Price in his chambers, a study off the main corridor lined with law tomes and ledgers, his face, usually so composed, flushed at our arrival. "Monsieur Poirot?" he greeted, voice steady but strained. "Back so soon?" Poirot produced the letter. "Explain this, Mr. Price. A letter drafted last night, encouraging Lady Clarendon to alter her will. You deny any motive, yet you supply your own signature." Price's hands shook as he took the letter. This is a forgery. I did not write those words." He ran a finger along the signature. "Look here. My B is too rounded, the flourishes too pronounced. I never fold my letters this way either." I watched Price's careful study. Poirot regarded him with interest. "Ah," he said softly. "Notice how the black wax is slightly chipped on one side. Perhaps you used the seal hastily or borrowed it from another." Price's lips pressed into a thin line. "That seal is mine, kept in a drawer. I assure you, I did not write that letter." "Then who did?" Poirot asked. "Someone with access to your writing materials, your seal, and your study. Someone who wishes to cast suspicion upon you." Price set the letter down. I think it must be Edward." His gaze darted toward the window. "He knows of my closeness to Lady Clarendon, and would benefit if I fell from favour." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "but I would speak with Edward before drawing conclusions." Price exhaled, relief flickering in his eyes. "I thank you, monsieur." As we left, I felt a twinge of doubt. The letter was an artful plant, a false trail. Yet the skill involved seemed beyond the novice. Who among the household possessed both access and dexterity to fabricate such a forgery? We returned to the library, where Poirot placed the letter on the mantel. "We shall examine everyone's handwriting and alibis, Hastings. But first I wish to revisit the strong room." The strong room door, a heavy oak panel secured by 2 locks, stood slightly ajar. Poirot tapped it gently. "Aha," he murmured. "Someone has tampered with the upper lock's mechanism, a faint scrape where the metal latch was forced outward." He produced a small mirror on a handle and slipped it through the gap to view the inside. "Note, Hastings, the lack of dust on the floor near the shelves. Someone removed and replaced volumes quickly, wiping away evidence." Inside lay the 3 ledgers, their spines slightly worn. Poirot carefully lifted volume 3 and leafed through it with gloved hands until he found the torn page. He compared the perforations in the binding to the indentations we observed earlier. "Perfectly aligned," he said softly, indicating the page was indeed removed here. But the person lacked skill to rebind it neatly, hence the crude stitching. He peered closer. "And notice this mark." He pointed to a small coffee stain on the adjacent page. "It matches the smudge on our stitched page." So the culprit placed the leaf back before allowing their coffee to cool. I shuddered at the thought of such meticulous planning. Yet if this was intended to mislead, it was working. Upon leaving the strong room, we encountered Lady Clarendon in the corridor, her expression troubled. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice low, "I wish to speak with you further about that letter to me." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, this letter may be a forgery. I suspect someone seeks to sow discord between you and Mr. Price." Her brow furrowed. "But why? Who would—" She trailed off. "Let us find out," Poirot said. "Please, join me in the study." And so we conducted a brief second interview, during which Lady Clarendon insisted that she had not responded to the letter and had even misplaced it. She could neither confirm nor deny its authenticity, only that it had frightened her. As we concluded, she grasped Poirot's hand. "Please find the truth," she whispered, "for Edward's sake." Back in the library, Poirot beckoned me to the desk drawers. "Hastings, fetch the small black case we found earlier." I retrieved a leather-bound spectacle case we had recovered from under the reading table. Poirot opened it to reveal a slender glass vial sealed with wax, the same color and texture as that on the forged letter. Inside lay a pale powder. "Aha," Poirot said triumphantly. "Powdered coffee grounds." He tapped the glass lightly, but also traces of another substance, arsenic perhaps. My breath caught. Arsenic? In his spectacles case? Poirot nodded. A perfect vessel for secrecy. The culprit must have intended to sneak the poison into someone's tea, perhaps during yesterday's luncheon. He held the vial aloft. "This is our false lead made real. Someone meant to accuse Mr. Price of coercion, then planned a secondary crime, a poisoning. But the poison remained unused, as was the forgery." He placed the vial on the desk. "We now have two strands, a forged letter and a vial of poison, both planted skillfully to incriminate. The question is not whether Mr. Price is guilty, but who among us has both the motive to frame him and the means to procure arsenic." As I looked at the vial, I realized how close we had come to tragedy. The first false lead had nearly ensnared an innocent man, and only Poirot's perspicacity had saved him. Yet the real culprit must be watching still, gauging our reactions, ready for the next move. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, as though listening to the murmur of his little grey cells. "The game deepens, Hastings," he said. "Tomorrow we shall confront the psychological game itself. But tonight, let us secure these items and rest. We have much to unravel." Thus ended our pursuit of the first false lead, an elaborate deception that both revealed and concealed, hinting at a mind clever enough to manipulate perception, yet anxious enough to slip a trace of truth into their lies. The manor's quiet corridors seemed to whisper in response. The true killer still lurked somewhere within. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. That evening, after a sparse dinner of roast pheasant and steamed vegetables, the household assembled in the drawing-room once more at Poirot's request. The fading glow of the oil lamps cast long shadows across the polished parquet floor, lending an air of uneasy anticipation. Poirot stood beside the fireplace, his posture relaxed, but his eyes glinting with purpose. "Mes amis," he began, "tonight we enter the heart of the matter. Until now, I have allowed each of you to present your versions of events, to see how you comport yourselves under polite examination. But a true detective must go further. He must provoke, he must unsettle, he must observe the flicker of guilt when it surfaces in response to suggestion." He smiled thinly. "I propose a little exercise, a hypothetical scenario. Imagine that someone among you has stolen a page from the family ledger and intends to use it as leverage, to coerce, to frighten, or perhaps to conceal a more sinister intention. How would that person feel, confronted by the very page they thought hidden? Would they grow bold and defensive, or timid and fearful?" He cast his gaze first on Lady Clarendon. "Madame, suppose the page implicated you in a scandal. Would you deny vehemently or seek to explain its presence?" She drew herself up. "I would explain with composure. I have nothing to hide." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, your composure is admirable." Then he turned to Edward. "And you, Edward? If the page revealed a clause depriving you of your inheritance, how would you react?" Edward's jaw tightened. He licked his lips, then said evenly, I would demand proof. I would read the full context. Very good. Poirot's voice remained courteous, yet I detected a sharper edge. Now, Mr. Price, if this page threatened your reputation, your career, what then? The solicitor swallowed visibly. I would insist upon the page's authenticity and take legal action if it were false. A murmur stirred among the servants. Poirot let it settle before addressing Mrs. Granville. Madame, if your neighbourly interest in family law placed you in a compromising position, would you admit your curiosity or disclaim knowledge? She pressed her lips together. I would be frank. I respect this family too much for deception. Finally, Poirot faced Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Farnsworth. And you, devoted as you are to service, would you protect your employers at any cost, or reveal the truth regardless of consequence? Thompson stood rigid. I serve my masters faithfully, but not blindly. I would speak truth. Mrs. Farnsworth dipped her chin. My loyalty is absolute, yet I believe in integrity. Poirot allowed each statement to hang in the air, then spoke softly. Let us put theory to the test. He turned toward Lady Clarendon. Madame, would you honour me by reading aloud the single line from the ledger page, omitting names, of course, that most concerns you? Her eyes widened. She glanced uncertainly at her son, then cleared her throat. Very well. She retrieved the page from Poirot's hand and read, And in the event of the daughter born of secret union, all entitlements revert to the trustees. She paused, colour rising in her cheeks. I am not sure I understand its import. Poirot nodded sympathetically. Understandable. Yet that passage could implicate any of us, if we believe in its context. He set the page aside and cast his gaze around. Now, Mr. Price, would you read the same line in your own words, as if to a client seeking counsel? Price swallowed, but complied. His voice was calm, though his hands shook slightly as he held the paper. Should evidence appear of an unacknowledged offspring, the estate administration is transferred to trustees named herein. When he finished, he cleared his throat. That is the legal interpretation. A hush followed. Poirot's eyes flitted from face to face, noting the subtle changes, Lady Clarendon's furrowed brow, Edward's restless fingers weaving in his lap, Mrs. Granville's tightening smile, Thompson's quick intake of breath, Mrs. Farnsworth's still posture. Poirot turned to me and said sotto voce, Observe how the wording disturbs each differently. The noble lady worries for her legacy, the young man for his rights, the solicitor for his professional standing, and the servants for the implications of secrets in their service. He then addressed the group more broadly. I now invite you to discuss among yourselves what this passage signifies. Let assumptions surface. An awkward silence ensued. Then Lady Clarendon spoke softly to her son. Edward, do you think grandfather had reason to suspect you? He shook his head, voice low. No, mother. I believe he sought to protect someone else, perhaps an unacknowledged cousin. Mrs. Granville leaned forward. A cousin? Or perhaps a secret child altogether? From a liaison unknown? Edward's face blanched. I cannot imagine. Thompson cleared his throat. Pardon me, madam, but I must point out that this page names no individual. It is a general clause. I am aware of that, Mrs. Granville snapped, though she immediately softened. Forgive me. Mrs. Farnsworth spoke for the first time. Sir Rowland was a man of many confidences. I recall his warning against prying into that volume. A sudden clamour arose at the east end of the room. The windows rattled as a gust of wind descended the corridor, scattering papers from the side table. The book of parish records landed open on a page marking a birth in 1892, almost a century ago. Poirot's moustaches twitched in amusement. The manner itself seems to underscore our conversation. Look, Hastings, at the record of June 12, 1892, a birth of a girl, unnamed. It predates any known heir. I glanced at the page. Could that be the secret union referenced? Precisely, Poirot murmured. The past intrudes upon the present. He closed the book and turned back to the gathering. Let the memory of that entry linger in your minds. The psychological pressure grows. Each of you now contemplates the possibility of hidden lineage, of intentions betrayed by parchment. Some of you may feel fear, others curiosity, or even indignation. He lifted a single finger. Yet remember, fear can compel action. If one among you panicked, you might have sought to reassert control by stitching the page back, a desperate act disguised as defiance. He paused, fixing each person with a keen glance. But who panicked? Who feared exposure most? And who watched the panic of another, seizing opportunity to frame a rival? As he spoke, I saw Lady Clarendon lean toward Edward, whispering urgently. Edward's face grew resolute. Mr. Price's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. Mrs. Granville's gaze flickered toward the window. Thompson swallowed. Mrs. Farnsworth bit her lip. Poirot let the tension reach its apex before speaking again. For tonight, I counsel rest. Tomorrow, we shall confront a secondary event, a new puzzle to test the murderer's reaction. But if any among you wishes to unburden, the hour is late. The walls of Clarendon Manor hold more ears than you may know. With that, he extinguished a lamp with a gentle click. The drawing-room plunged into soft darkness, illuminated only by the dying embers in the hearth. One by one, the group rose, exchanging uneasy farewells before slipping away. When the last footstep had receded, Poirot turned to me. Ah, Hastings, what emotion have we elicited? Fear, doubt, perhaps shame. The stage is set for the next act, and our quarry is now unsettled. Tomorrow's second mystery will draw forth the true culprit. The game proceeds, and the little grey cells lighten into clarity. He smiled, tapping his head. Patience, my friend, patience. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The next morning the manor buzzed with hushed speculation. Over breakfast in the sunlit conservatory, servants exchanged nervous glances, while the family and guests spoke in low tones. The suspense of the night's psychological exercise still lingered, casting shadows over even the brightest moments. Poirot joined us at the long mahogany table, his sharp gaze sweeping the room as he savoured a delicate poached egg. Mon ami Hastings, he said quietly, today we shall pursue the second thread of our investigation. The true culprit, now unsettled by yesterday's revelations, may strike again, this time to conceal evidence or intimidate a witness. No sooner had he spoken than Mrs. Farnsworth entered, pale and trembling. In her gloved hand she held a small sealed envelope. Monsieur Poirot, she announced, voice unsteady, I found this on the desk in my office. She extended the envelope toward him. It was slipped beneath the keyhole. Poirot accepted it with a nod and broke the wax seal. Inside lay a single page, crisp and unmarked, except for a neat header. Confidential, to be read only by Margaret Clarendon and Barnaby Price. Beneath this, in Mrs. Farnsworth's neat handwriting, the handwriting she had claimed never to enter Volume 3, were the words, The page you seek is not in the strong room, but buried in the west flower bed beneath the rose bush. Lady Clarendon gasped. "My handwriting," she whispered. "I did not write this." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A stolen page once again promised, yet no ledger has been unearthed." He looked at Mrs. Farnsworth. "Madame, are you certain this is your script?" She swallowed. I have not handled such an envelope. I was clearing correspondence." "Then someone has imitated your hand to send a message," Poirot said. "A second cryptic note. Designed to lure us into the garden, I suspect. Let us not be fooled." He turned to the assembled group, still in mid-breakfast. "I propose we test this instruction immediately. Hastings, will you procure a spade? We shall examine the west flower bed at once." Within minutes, we assembled outside by the rose bush, whose blooms still nodded in the crisp morning air. Poirot knelt, carefully brushing the soil with his gloved fingers. The others formed a semicircle, their expressions tense. "Observe," he murmured. "Fresh earth, disturbed in a circular pattern approximately 2 feet from the trunk. Someone has indeed dug here, but see how the soil rests unevenly, as though the hole was refilled by a hurried hand." He produced a trowel and gently began to excavate, layer by layer. I watched anxiously. Each inch revealed only earth and tangled roots. The assembled gasped as the hole grew deeper, yet no ledger or parchment appeared. Finally, Poirot tapped the spade handle and withdrew. "Nothing," he announced. "An empty promise." Edward frowned. Someone wanted us out here alone. "Exactly," Poirot replied. "To buy time." He stood, sweeping his gaze across the group. This was a trap, perhaps to distract us while the real offender destroyed further evidence inside. He beckoned us back toward the house. "Come, we must inspect the study and the strong room again before someone takes advantage of our absence." As we turned, Lady Granville lingered, her brow creased with concern. She plucked a single rose petal and folded it in her palm. Inside the library, Poirot led us to the side table where the sealed vial of coffee and arsenic still lay. "I believe someone intended to reclaim this poison," he said, "and so our perpetrator manufactured a ruse to draw us away." He opened the vial and sniffed thoughtfully. "Ah, notice the faint aroma of lavender, a pleasant scent used to mask the coffee. Someone endeavored to shield its chemical odor, probably to avoid detection." Mrs. Granville's eyes widened. "Lavender, like the sachet in my sitting room." Poirot turned to her. "Precise. Your sachet, perhaps, contains some lavender. The scent faintly clings to your gloves." She shook her head. "No, I keep lavender in my pocket to calm my nerves." "And yet," Poirot said, "the mingling of lavender and coffee implies your involvement." He paused for effect. "But do not be alarmed, madame. I believe you were framed." He moved toward the study door. "Now let us see what opportunity the ruse afforded our culprit inside." In the study, the desk drawers lay ajar as we had left them. Poirot's eyes lit upon the blotter, now displaying a neat pile of writing paper and an ink bottle. "Take note, Hastings, how the ink bottle's rim bears fresh smudges. Someone took pen to paper here after breakfast, most likely to forge this second note." He pointed to the blotter's underside. "And see these indentations, 2 impressions matching the envelope's seal. They correspond to the seal of Volume 1's official correspondence. Someone lifted a seal meant only for formal notices." I bent to inspect. Beneath the blotter lay the seal impression in reverse, still faintly rendered in the paper's fibers. Poirot extracted the envelope fragment from his pocket. "Our next step is clear. We must ascertain whose seal was used, and who had access to the seal repository." He pocketed the second note and turned to the group. Ladies and gentlemen, this attempt to lure us away and frame an innocent shows both desperation and cunning. Someone among you has rehearsed each step, forging handwriting, using seals, masking scents, and planting traps. But in doing so, they have left behind their signature, one too distinctive to evade detection. He paused, letting the tension mount. Tonight, we shall gather once more, and I shall unveil the hidden connections that link these acts of misdirection. For now, I require each of you to surrender any personal seals or unique stamps you possess. As Mrs. Farnsworth and Mr. Thompson collected the seals from the solicitors' and neighbours' desks, I noticed Lady Clarendon's trembling hand clutch the seal on her desk, a small ivory device with a worn family crest. She hesitated before dropping it into the tray. Poirot regarded her with a knowing smile. "Good, madame." Then his gaze swept over the assembled. Soon, the culprit's careful plan will unravel, and the buried secret will be laid bare. Outside, the afternoon sun cast a golden hue across Clarendon Manor, as though unaware of the turbulence within. Yet for those caught in Poirot's web of deduction, the house had become a crucible of truth, each ruse only tightening the bonds of suspicion around the real perpetrator. And with the secondary mystery exposed as folly, the true game was poised to reach its climax. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The following morning, a chill wind rattled the leaded windows of Clarendon Manor, as if eager to sweep away secrets long buried. Over a quiet breakfast in the sunlit conservatory, Monsieur Poirot and I exchanged knowing glances. Today he would unveil the subtle threads binding our suspects, threads invisible until now. "Mon ami," he murmured as he stirred his coffee. "We have seen theatrical displays, misdirection, and psychological traps, but true motives lie in relationships, those bonds and enmities that twist beneath the surface. Today, we shall reveal the hidden connections that underpin this affair." I nodded, recalling the forged letter, the second cryptic note, and the aborted search in the rosebush. Each ploy required knowledge not only of the house, but of its inhabitants' private ties. Poirot set down his spoon and rose. "Let us begin with the solicitor, Mr. Price," he announced. "Barnaby, will you join us in the library?" Price rose, the colour draining from his cheeks, and followed Poirot and me down the corridor. There, in the flickering lamplight, Poirot closed the drawing-room doors and turned to the solicitor. "Mr. Price," he said, voice low, "you confessed to professional dealings with Lady Clarendon concerning the will. Yet I have since learned that you and Mrs. Granville attended an auction together last fortnight. On that very day, a rare first edition concerning the Clarendon lineage was sold." Price's brows furrowed. "That is correct, but hardly unusual. Mrs. Granville and I share antiquarian interests." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed. Yet the book you sought shed light on Sir Rowland's silent apprehension. He researched an obscure family branch, the Montforts, who vanished in India in 1874. Mrs. Granville purchased that volume, but you provided the funds." The solicitor's breath caught. I merely assisted her financially. She insisted it was crucial to understand Clarendon's past. "Curious," Poirot murmured, "for only one of you among the household has roots in India." He tapped Price's pocket, extracting a handwritten note. "The gardener's pay schedule for an assistant from Quetta, Pakistan." "You arranged for the gardener's nephew to be employed here, same region where Montfort records might survive." Price paled. "I arranged his employment to aid household efficiency. I had no interest in the Montforts." Poirot pursed his lips. Yet you financed Mrs. Granville's purchase of the volume which revealed the vanished branch. Then you forged a letter to Lady Clarendon, suggesting she amend her will. You used the Montfort history to unsettle her belief in her sole heir. Price's voice trembled. Monsieur, that is monstrous. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet that is one connection. Now, Hastings, let us call Mrs. Granville. When Mrs. Granville entered, her lavender gown crisp, Poirot held up the Montfort volume's title page. Madame, you have taken a keen interest in your family's past, yet as a neighbour, not a relative. Why pursue Clarendon's secrets? She hesitated. I believed Sir Rowland's adoption of his nephew from India was an act of compassion. I thought the Montfort story worthy of compassion too. He is not your nephew, Poirot said softly. He is your son. Her breath caught. What? Mr. Price, companion at auction, financier, conspirator, arranged your meeting to guide you toward Clarendon's hidden lineage. He hoped you would spark discord between mother and son. Mrs. Granville staggered. I had no inkling. I simply wished to honor Sir Rowland's memory. Yet you allowed yourself to be manipulated. Poirot folded his arms. Now consider the Clarendon children's tutor, Miss Bartram. He glanced toward the doorway. Hastings, might you invite her in? I stepped into the corridor and returned escorting Miss Bartram, the young governess responsible for Edward's studies. She curtsied nervously, clutching her satchel. Poirot greeted her kindly. Miss Bartram, you were absent from the first interviews, yet you have observed more than most. He held up the gardener's pay schedule. You recommended this young man be hired. His uncle was your mentor at Oxford, was he not? Her eyes widened. Professor Montfort was my tutor. His family's archives in Quetta contain letters from Sir Rowland. Precisely, Poirot said. You sought access to those archives, and thus you placed his nephew here to facilitate correspondence. You have acted as intermediary, collecting letters, translating them, advising Mrs. Granville. Miss Bartram stammered. I wanted to uncover the Clarendon connection to the Montforts. I thought it a harmless scholarly pursuit. A harmless pursuit, until someone wished to use those letters to influence inheritance. Poirot's voice was firm, but compassionate. You never touched the ledger page, but you provided the means for the others to act. Miss Bartram sank into a chair, tears in her eyes. I meant only to learn history, not to sow deception. History is powerful, Poirot said quietly, and tonight its burden becomes heavier. He nodded. Bring the others. One by one, Lady Clarendon, Edward, Mr. Thompson, and Mrs. Farnsworth joined us. Poirot addressed the company. Hidden connections abound in this house. Mr. Price and Mrs. Granville share a clandestine bibliophile pact. Miss Bartram revived the Montfort link through her Oxford tutor. Lady Clarendon's late husband took in the nephew as a favoured ward, now suspected by Edward as a rival heir. Edward's face went pale. I thought my inheritance assured. Lady Clarendon reached for his hand. My son, your inheritance remains intact. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. Yet one question remains. Who stitched the page? Who used these connections to orchestrate the theft and subsequent misdirection? He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The culprit must be someone at the nexus of these ties, someone who knew of Edward's fearful thoughts about the Montfort child, someone who had intimate access to the strong-room keys and the technical skill to rebind the page. He looked at Thompson and Farnsworth. Yet the servants knew nothing of Montfort affairs. Their loyalty to the family is steadfast. Poirot turned to Lady Clarendon. "Madame, you discovered the ledger page, yet you never mentioned the codicil's full text. You feared for Edward and perhaps for Edward's rival. You possessed the sewing kit, and you walked the garden at night." Lady Clarendon's eyes filled. I did mend the page, out of desperation. I discovered the codicil spoke of a child born of secret union. I feared for Edward's future. I thought if I could hide it, the family would remain secure. A hush fell. Edward's eyes brimmed. "Mother," she pressed a trembling hand to her heart. "Forgive me, my son. I thought I protected you." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "An understandable motive, but misguided. You removed the page, stitched it back, planting evidence to draw attention and sympathy rather than suspicion. You forged the second note in Mrs. Farnsworth's hand to mislead us into the garden, giving you time to conceal the page again." Lady Clarendon bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. Poirot turned to the others. "The codicil is secure once more in the ledger. The secondary crimes, letter forgery, poisoning attempt, were orchestrated by Mr. Price, who sought to exploit your actions for his own gain. But the initial theft, the theatrical mend, was committed by none other than Lady Margaret Clarendon herself." He paused, letting each revelation sink in. The assembly stood in stunned silence, the elegant drawing-room seeming suddenly cavernous and cold. Poirot addressed Lady Clarendon gently. "Madame, your love for Edward led you astray, but no malice drove your hand. Tomorrow we shall confront the final piece and restore true justice to Clarendon Manor." As the assembled slowly dispersed, I looked at Poirot in wonder. His uncovering of hidden connections, those covert alliances, scholarly pursuits and heartfelt fears, had stripped away layers of deception, and yet with one piece of the puzzle now revealed, the grand finale still awaited. The little grey cells had pressed forward, but the story was far from over. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. That evening, after the household had dispersed and the lamps were lit one by one, Monsieur Poirot invited me to join him in the library. The air was still, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. He stood before the mantel, the stitched ledger page displayed beneath a glass dome, as though on exhibition. "Hastings," he said softly, "I have a secret to share, one that clinches my conviction. Yet it must be kept until the moment of revelation, lest the culprit detect my certainty and slip away." He beckoned me closer and pointed to the dark thread running along the page's margin. "Observe these stitches. We have spoken of their irregularity and the frantic manner in which they were applied. But look, Hastings, at the knot securing the final stitch." I bent down, peering through his magnifying loupe. The knot was small, almost invisible, yet distinct, a double half-hitch used to prevent slippage on a load-bearing seam. "I initially dismissed this as a detail of haste," Poirot continued, "but I have since discovered that this particular knot is uncommon in ordinary sewing. It is taught to members of certain elite societies, those with military or nautical training, who rely on a knot that will not unravel under strain." I frowned. Nautical training? But none of the household served at sea, except perhaps distant relatives. Poirot touched the knot with a single fingertip. Precisely. I recalled that Lady Clarendon's late brother, Major Edward Farnsworth, served with the Royal Navy. After his passing, his uniform and gear passed to no one, until last week, when I observed Lady Clarendon packing a valise in her private rooms. He reached to the side table and produced a small battered sewing kit. I borrowed this from her morning basket when she spoke with me in confidence. Opening the kit, he held up a slender brass thimble engraved with a naval anchor. See here? This is Major Farnsworth's thimble, a family heirloom, its anchor motif unmistakable, and the thread inside is identical in texture and dye to that which stitched our ledger page. I swallowed. So Lady Clarendon did not merely use any thread, she used her brother's, from her own sewing kit. Exactly, Poirot said. She could have borrowed black thread from any maid's kit, yet she chose this, consciously or not. The secret clue lies not in the torn parchment, but in the thread that binds it. He closed the kit and slipped it into his breast pocket. This subtle inheritance tied her to the crime as surely as the ledger page tied the secret to our family. I glanced up at him. But why such an elaborate ruse? Why stitch the page back rather than simply remove it? Poirot folded his hands behind his back and circled the dome. She feared exposure of the codicil, and by reattaching the page in a dramatic fashion, she hoped to control the narrative, to present herself as the discoverer rather than the thief. Yet her anxiety led her to make errors. The coffee stain, the backstage forging, and above all, the borrowed thread. He paused, looking toward the door. Tomorrow, Hastings, we shall confront her in the presence of all. We shall reveal this knot and the thimble, and watch her reaction when she recognizes her brother's insignia. For in that moment, guilt will no longer wear a mask. I placed my hand lightly on his arm. Brilliant, Poirot. Your little grey cells have discerned what all else missed. He smiled, eyes twinkling. Ah, but it is not done until the culprit confesses. Let us prepare for the grand gathering. The stage is set, the secret known to us alone, and the final act awaits tomorrow. As I left the library, the hush of the night seemed to thicken, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Clarendon Manor lay silent under a moonlit sky, an intricate web of secrets poised on the verge of complete disclosure. And with Poirot's secret clue unveiled to me, the final confrontation could not be far behind. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. Morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the drawing-room windows, casting a pale glow over the assembled household. The final gathering approached, and beneath the polite airs of civility, tensions crackled like the dying embers of a fire. Servants quietly prepared the room, placing chairs in a half-circle around the marble hearth, while Lady Clarendon, Edward, Mr. Price, Mrs. Granville, Miss Bartram, Mr. Thompson, and Mrs. Farnsworth took their places, faces composed but eyes betraying an undercurrent of unease. Poirot entered, resplendent in a charcoal frock coat and with a gleam of anticipation in his eyes. In one hand, he carried a small velvet cushion upon which lay the battered thimble engraved with a naval anchor, and in the other the tiny glass dome encasing the stitched ledger page. "Mes amis," he began, his high-pitched voice unnervingly calm, "you have been summoned to witness the culmination of our inquiries. Before us lie two artifacts, the ledger page, torn and crudely sewn, and the thimble that binds our mystery. Soon, the hidden connections and psychological games will coalesce into truth." He placed the dome on a low table. Then, with theatrical care, he set the thimble beside it. "Observe this thimble, engraved with the anchor of the Royal Navy, a symbol of discipline and service. It belonged to Major Edward Farnsworth, deceased brother of Lady Margaret Clarendon. It is not a common possession in any lady's sewing kit." Lady Clarendon's hand trembled on the armrest. Edward leaned forward, brow furrowed. Mr. Price swallowed. Mrs. Granville's gaze darted to the lace curtains, as though contemplating an escape. Miss Bartram's fingers twitched nervously around her satchel. Even Thompson and Farnsworth exchanged quick, apprehensive glances. Poirot continued, "And yet, this very thimble contained the thread used to reattach our ledger page. The knot securing those stitches was of a nautical type, known to those trained in sailing or military usage. The thread was drawn from this thimble's supply." He tapped the cushion lightly. "Madame, would you care to explain why you mended the stolen page with your brother's sewing implement?" Margaret Clarendon's composure shuddered. She rose, voice trembling. I thought I was protecting my son. When I discovered the codicil, I feared Edward's future more than my pride. I thought if I could make it appear that I alone found and mended the page, if I diverted suspicion, I could bury the clause until we understood its meaning. Poirot inclined his head. A mother's love, admirable yet dangerous when guided by fear. You feared the existence of a secret child, yet insisted upon concealing it, stitching back the evidence to control the narrative. Edward's shoulders sagged as he interjected, voice thick. "Mother, you should have told me. We could have faced it together." Tears shimmered in Lady Clarendon's eyes. I did not know of its exact content until I unfolded it under lamplight. I panicked." Poirot nodded gravely. "Your panic set this chain in motion, the page theft, the staged discoveries, the forged letters, and even the attempted poisoning." He turned to the others. "Yet while Lady Clarendon initiated the theft and misdirection, she is not the only architect of deception among us." He picked up the glass dome, lifting it so that light danced on the edges of the page within. After the page was stitched, someone sought to exploit the event for personal gain. A forged letter was written in Mr. Price's hand, designed to sow discord between Lady Clarendon and her solicitor. A second note, penned in Mrs. Farnsworth's handwriting, lured us into the garden, and a vial of coffee-mixed arsenic awaited use. A gasp escaped Mrs. Granville's lips. She clutched her lavender shawl. But who? Poirot's gaze settled on Barnaby Price. "Monsieur Price, you financed Mrs. Granville's acquisition of the Montfort volume. You arranged the gardener's nephew's employment to facilitate correspondence, and you possessed the motive to see Lady Clarendon's trust undermined. You crafted the forged letter to pressure her into revising her will in your favor." Price's face drained of color. "Monsieur, I confess I resented my position. I longed for greater reward for my services. But I never intended harm." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Ambition can be harmful when armed with deception. You planted the forgery, and you procured the arsenic to threaten a final blow. Yet you counted upon the chaos Lady Clarendon's act would cause. You intended to finish the play and claim your prize." He turned to the group. "Thus, we have two conspirators, a mother driven by fear of a threatened heir, and a solicitor driven by greed. Between them, they orchestrated a series of psychological and physical crimes." Price sank to his knees. I am sorry. I cannot justify it." Lady Clarendon stepped forward, trembling. "I acted alone when I stole the page, but I did not know of Barnaby's letter or the poison." Poirot smiled gently. "You are right, madame. You are culpable in the initial theft and misdirection, and in your own forgery of the second note. Barnaby Price is guilty of forgery, attempted poisoning, and plotting to exploit your actions for his gain." He turned one last time to the assembled. "Justice will be served. But let this be a lesson. Fear and greed, unchecked, can warp even the most noble intentions. Only by truth, Painful though it may be, can harmony be restored? A heavy silence followed. Edward knelt beside his mother, taking her hand. Mrs. Farnsworth and Mr. Thompson hovered anxiously, while Mrs. Granville and Miss Bartram exchanged sympathetic looks. Poirot collected the thimble and the dome. I shall deliver these items to the local authorities as evidence. The codicil will remain intact under guardianship of the trustees until the rightful heir is determined. He faced Lady Clarendon. And you, madame, will face the consequences of your actions. But know that your motive was love, not malice. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. Poirot offered me a quick nod. Mon ami, the little grey cells have done their work. The tangled web has been untangled, and the truth revealed. As the household dispersed to process the revelations, I remained by Poirot's side, marvelling at the elegance of his solution. Outside, the manor's gardens basked in morning sun, oblivious to human frailties laid bare within. Yet within those walls, the balance of justice had been restored, and the secrets of Clarendon Manor, once stitched in silence, were finally unbound. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. That afternoon, the household assembled in the drawing-room at Poirot's behest, their faces taut with anticipation. Overhead, the late spring light filtered through lace curtains, illuminating the polished mahogany and the silver tea set awaiting the final confrontation. Poirot stood in the centre of the semicircle, his posture composed and commanding. "Mes amis," he began, "we have examined motives, gathered clues, unearthed hidden relationships, and discovered the secret of the nautical knot and thimble. Now we must put the culprit to the test. I will recall each suspect's movements and possessions, and you will observe the reactions these reminders provoke." He turned to Lady Clarendon. "Madame, you first removed the ledger page late yesterday, using your brother's thimble to stitch it. You carried a cup of black coffee into the library, hence the brown stain on the page, and you forged a second note in Mrs. Farnsworth's hand, using lavender-scented stationery." He paused, watching her calm facade tremble. Margaret Clarendon raised a gloved hand to her chest. "Monsieur, Poirot held up a slender, coffee-stained ribbon, the ribbon that once bound Lady Clarendon's morning correspondence, now preserved under glass. "This ribbon bears both the aroma of your coffee and the faint hint of lavender from your lavender sachet. You dropped it here when you returned the ledger page." Lady Clarendon's lips parted. I did not realize." Poirot let the silence deepen. Then he addressed Mr. Price. "Monsieur Barnaby Price, you obtained arsenic and mixed it secretly with coffee grounds stored in the library. You intended to threaten a victim by spiking a teacup, perhaps to silence discovery or to frame our housekeeper." The solicitor stiffened, eyes widening. He stepped backward. "That is impossible." Poirot produced a folded scrap of paper from his pocket, the servants' list annotated in Price's handwriting, detailing a special coffee order for morning refreshments. "Your own list, discovered beneath the blotter," Poirot noted. Price's voice trembled. I only ordered the coffee." "And you used it for a more nefarious purpose." Poirot's thin smile hardened. Turning to the assembled, he raised a hand. "But this is not the true miscreant, only an accomplice. The one who first stole the page, stitched it, and set these machinations in motion is someone driven by maternal fear." He pointed to Lady Clarendon. "Madame, I have observed your steadfast devotion to Edward. Yet devotion can twist into desperate concealment. Tell us, what did you see on that ledger page that frightened you so?" Margaret Clarendon's shoulders slumped. She clasped her hands, voice quavering. I saw the codicil naming a secret child. I feared Edward's inheritance would be nullified. Precisely, Poirot said. And in your panic, you sought to control the secret rather than to expose it. You believed that by stitching the page, you could buy time to understand its full import and preserve Edward's future. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Yet your greatest misstep was revealing knowledge only the thief would have. At dinner last night you remarked upon the lack of lace beneath the reinforcement of the strong-room door, a detail no one but the intruder would know. Lady Clarendon's eyes widened in alarm. I only repeated what I thought I'd heard the locksmith mention. Poirot's moustaches quivered. But the locksmith never spoke of lace. He spoke of metal hinges. You appropriated the term lace from the ledger's margin ornamentation, a flourish visible only when the page was returned. She gasped, trembling. Oh, I see now. Poirot nodded to me. Hastings, would you please bring forward the ledger page and the thimble? I presented them on a silver tray. Poirot lifted the dome and the thimble, placing them before Lady Clarendon. Madame, the ledger page's stitch, the thimble's anchor, and your slip of language all converge to identify you as the architect of the initial theft and misdirection. Tears brimmed in her eyes. She bowed her head, voice barely a whisper. I am guilty. I stole the page and sewed it back, believing I acted in my son's best interest. I forged that second note to mislead those who might discover the truth too soon. Poirot regarded her with gentle compassion. Your motive was love, though misguided. Now that the truth stands revealed, you must face the consequences. A hush fell over the room. Edward stepped forward, his face a mixture of relief and sorrow. He took his mother's hand, offering comfort. Poirot turned to the remaining household. You have witnessed how a single fear can fracture trust and set into motion a chain of deception. Let this be a lesson to all. Honesty, though painful, is the surest path to justice. He bowed. Our work here is done. I shall leave it to the authorities to formalize these admissions. For my part, I am content that the little grey cells have prevailed once more. As the weeping Lady Clarendon and her reconciled son departed the drawing-room, I leaned toward Poirot. Remarkable, mon ami. The subtle linguistic slip was key. He smiled, eyes bright. Ah, Hastings, the mind betrays itself when under pressure, and so the confrontation concludes. But beware, sometimes the heart of the matter remains hidden even after confession. Outside, the late afternoon sun shone upon Clarendon Manor, its grounds restored to calm. Within its walls, a family had faced the dire consequences of fear and love, guided by the unerring insight of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. Late that evening, the household had retired to their rooms, subdued by the day's revelations. Even the servants moved with hushed footsteps, their loyalty shaken by the confession of Lady Clarendon and the exposure of Barnaby Price's duplicity. Only Poirot and I lingered in the drawing-room, where the two incriminating artifacts, the ledger page and the silver thimble, lay side by side beneath the lamp's glow. Monday. Ami, Poirot murmured as he polished his walking cane. We must remain vigilant. In all my experience, a true culprit will not rest quietly once cornered. They will attempt one final maneuver: flight, destruction of evidence, or even violence. I nodded. Shall we post a watcher at each exit? He smiled thinly. No need, Hastings. I prefer to allow the culprit the illusion of freedom. It makes the trap all the more effective. Shortly after midnight, a sudden clang resounded through the halls. The heavy door of the solicitor's study had been forced open. Poirot and I exchanged a glance and hurried through the dim corridor, where oil lamps cast dancing shadows upon the portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Outside Price's study, the door stood ajar. Inside, we found the desk overturned and papers strewn across the floor. The window at the far end was open, its curtains fluttering in the night breeze. On the windowsill lay Barnaby Price's spare spectacles, one lens fractured. But Price himself was nowhere to be seen. "He has fled," I whispered. Poirot stooped and examined the broken spectacles. "Notice the pattern of the crack, deliberate pressure at the hinge. He did not drop these. He crushed them to hinder pursuit." I peered out into the moonlit garden. He could not have gone far. "Perhaps," Poirot said, voice calm. "But he also left this." He held up a folded scrap of Mrs. Farnsworth's stationery, the second note's paper. On it, hastily scrawled in Price's shaky hand, was a single line: "I will see you at the boathouse, alone. BP." I frowned. The boathouse. No one mentioned that before. "An old family boathouse on the far side of the lake," Poirot explained. "Unused for decades, but known to the household. We must catch him there." We burst out into the garden, the cool night air sharp against our faces. A half-moon cast silver light across the lawn, and the distant ripple of water marked the lake's edge. Poirot led swiftly, cane tapping with purpose, while I followed close behind, heart pounding. Through clipped hedges and over a low stone wall, we skirted the perimeter until the dark silhouette of the boathouse emerged, a weathered timber structure, its door slightly ajar. We approached silently, Poirot signaling me to check the flank. Inside, moonlight slanted through broken boards, illuminating the dusty hull of an old rowing boat. At the far end, a figure crouched over a small crate, prying at its lock. It was Barnaby Price, his face drawn and pale, sweat glistening on his brow. He looked up, startled. "Monsieur Poirot, Hastings, how did you—" "Quickly," Poirot said, voice cold. "Step away from that crate." Price hesitated, trembling. "Listen to me. If you stop me now, I will lose everything. I have only one chance to destroy these." He jabbed at the crate's padlock with a dagger pulled from his belt. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot exclaimed. "He carries a weapon." I moved forward to block his escape. "Put down the dagger, Price." Price's eyes darted around. "Never. This evidence, these letters and journals, prove the Montfort connection beyond doubt. If they surface, Clarendon's reputation, and mine, will be ruined." He lunged toward the crate, but Poirot was faster. With a quick flick of his cane, he knocked the dagger from Price's grasp. The blade clattered across the wooden floor. Price let out a strangled cry. I closed in, seizing his arm. "It's over, Barnaby." Poirot strode to the crate and pried it open, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. He extracted them carefully. "These are Lady Clarendon's correspondence with the Montfort archives, private letters that connect the secret child to the family's trusteeship. Price intended to burn them." I shone my torch on the scattered papers around the crate. Among them lay a small leather-bound notebook bearing Price's name. Inside were detailed entries, instructions for forging the letter, notes on procuring arsenic, and a precise schedule for sowing discord among the household. Poirot's voice was stern as he raised the notebook. "Monsieur Price, these confessions, penned in your own hand, seal your guilt. You attempted to destroy both civil and criminal evidence, to silence truth by arson and violence." Price slumped against the wall, his shoulders heaving. I was desperate. We escorted Price back to the main house under guard of 2 constables summoned earlier by Mrs. Farnsworth's whispered plea. The manor's grand entrance loomed before us, its windows dark save for a single light in the drawing room where Poirot had left the ledger page and thimble. Inside, the household waited anxiously. Lady Clarendon stood near the mantel, her face drawn but resolute. Edward hovered at her side. Mrs. Farnsworth and Mr. Thompson exchanged relieved glances, while Mrs. Granville and Miss Bartram offered quiet support. Poirot entered, followed by the constables with their captive. He released Barnaby Price into their custody without fanfare. The constables led him away, his eyes cast downward. Poirot addressed the assembly. Barnaby Price attempted a final act of desperation, flight, arson, and destruction of evidence. Thanks to his haste, we intercepted him in time to preserve the letters and journals that fully document his schemes. He turned to Lady Clarendon. "Madame, the Montfort letters have been secured. The secret child's rights will be respected, and Edward's future clarified. Your own actions, though misguided, were born of maternal love. You will face admonishment, but not ignominy." Edward embraced his mother. She wept softly, head resting on his shoulder. Poirot offered a gentle smile. "And now, mes amis, we prepare for the final piece, the reconstruction of events and the restoration of order. But tonight, let us acknowledge that desperate fear and avarice have been thwarted by calm reason and steadfast observation." He looked at me, his eyes alight. "The little grey cells have triumphed once more, Hastings. Tomorrow we bring this affair to its conclusion." Outside, the moon had drifted behind clouds, casting Clarendon Manor into stillness. Within its walls, the echoes of a desperate attempt to escape had been stilled, and the path to justice lay clear at last. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The dawn of our final day at Clarendon Manor arrived pale and still, as though nature itself held its breath for what was to come. In the library, Poirot stood before the consolidated evidence, the stitched ledger page, the naval thimble, the Montfort letters, and the bundle of parish records that Lady Grantham had unintentionally revealed. He motioned me to join him at the long oak table where a single volume lay open to an unassuming birth register. "Hastings," he said softly, "we possess every testimony, every forged note, every desperate act. Yet one detail eluded our grasp until now, the true status of the child named in the codicil. We saw the birth entry of June 12th, 1892, daughter of Sir Rowland Clarendon. But what followed was unnoted." He traced a slender finger down the register's pages. "Observe here, a marginal annotation, nearly faded away. Died June 19th, 1892. 7 days. The child never drew breath beyond infancy, and thus the codicil's provisions lapsed at her passing." I peered closer. So the codicil, however meticulously drafted, was negated by the child's death. Edward's inheritance is unchallenged. "Precisely," Poirot exclaimed, a rare note of triumph in his voice. "The final piece falls into place. The death record extinguishes the threat that Lady Clarendon feared. Yet in her panic, she overlooked this annotation, and it was the very omission that seeded the entire drama." He closed the register and placed it before us. "Now, Hastings, we must bring the household together one last time and share this truth. But observe the timing." He tapped his pocket watch. "The trustees arrive at noon to formalize Edward's position. We have a narrow window." At 11 o'clock, the drawing room filled once more. The chairs formed the familiar semicircle, yet there was a different energy in the air, anticipation tinged with relief. Lady Clarendon sat beside Edward, his hand resting on hers, both prepared for whatever might follow. Mrs. Farnsworth and Mr. Thompson stood respectfully, while Mrs. Granville and Miss Bartram exchanged supportive nods. Even the gardener's nephew, summoned as a witness to the Montfort correspondence, lingered quietly by the window. Poirot entered, carrying the birth register and a copy of the codicil. He placed them on the low table, then faced the company. Mes amis, the moment has arrived to reveal the final truth. We have traced every thread of deceit, every misdirected motive, and preserved every letter and record. Yet one question remained. Was the child who triggered our alarm ever alive beyond infancy? He opened the register. Here is the birth entry, June 12, 1892, and here, marked faintly in the margin, the child's passing on June 19th, 1892. The codicil, drafted to secure provisions for that child, expired upon her death. Therefore, no living heir ever existed beyond our known line. Lady Clarendon exhaled, tears welling. I should have checked the margin. I saw only the birth. Edward's shoulders eased as he read the annotation. Mother, it changes everything. Poirot nodded. Indeed, mon ami. Your inheritance stands secure in law and in fact. All provisions revert to you. He turned to Mrs. Granville. And you, madame, may rest assured that your scholarly compassion uncovered a truth long forgotten, not a competing claim. Mrs. Granville smiled, eyes bright. I am glad, monsieur. He then addressed Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Farnsworth. Your steadfast service preserved these records until they could be examined. Without your vigilance, the marginal note might have remained hidden. Both bowed respectfully. Finally, he turned to Lady Clarendon. Madam, your initial act, removing and stitching the page, was born of fear for your son's future. Though misguided, it was a mother's instinct. But fear, when untempered by fact, can mislead even the most devoted heart. Margaret Clarendon pressed her hand to her chest. I understand, monsieur. I only wish to atone. Poirot smiled gently. Atonement comes with truth. You and Edward may now face your future without shadows. As the manor's clock chimed 11, a knock sounded at the door. 2 trustees entered, their stately demeanour greeting us with formality. Poirot greeted them and handed over the codicil and the annotated register. The trustees examined the records, then nodded approvingly. Mr. Edward Clarendon, their spokesman announced, is hereby recognised as sole heir to the estate. No further claims exist. A murmur of satisfaction swept the room. Edward clasped his mother's hand, and even Mrs. Granville allowed herself a small, relieved smile. Poirot turned to me, eyes bright behind his spectacles. Hastings, the little grey cells have prevailed. The final piece, the death entry, was the key to resolve all uncertainty. I nodded, marvelling at the elegance of the solution. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, illuminating Clarendon Manor's facade in warm gold. Inside, a family once torn by fear and deception now stood united in truth. As the trustees departed, Lady Clarendon approached Poirot. Monsieur, I cannot thank you enough. You have guided us from panic to peace. He inclined his head, moustaches bristling with modest pride. Madame, it was my pleasure. May this lesson fortify your confidence in fact over fear. With that, Poirot gathered his belongings. At the threshold he paused and looked back at the restored harmony of the household. Clarendon Manor, he said softly, has witnessed a drama of secrets, lies, and revelations. But in the end, reason and honesty have triumphed, and so we close this chapter. until the next mystery beckons the little grey cells. He smiled once more, then departed, leaving behind a home where the final piece had fallen neatly into place, and the future shone brightly for those who embraced the truth. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. By late afternoon, as the golden light of summer waned, the drawing-room was arranged one last time for the definitive assembly. The servants saw to every detail, cushions fluffed, curtains drawn to admit just enough twilight, and a silver tray of petits fours placed upon the central table, an understated nod to normalcy after days of tumult. In the hushed stillness, the family and remaining household gathered. Lady Clarendon and Edward seated together, their faces composed yet touched by lingering strain. Mrs. Granville and Miss Bartram poised supportively, Mrs. Farnsworth and Mr. Thompson standing with quiet dignity. At precisely 5:30, Hercule Poirot entered, his small figure framed by the doorway, spectacles catching a final glimmer of sun. In his hand he carried a slender folder containing the official records wrapped in a green ribbon. With a gracious nod, he indicated for all to take their seats. "Mes amis," he began, voice calm and clear, "we have travelled a complex path, the theft and clandestine mending of a single ledger page, the forging of letters, the placement of poison, the attempted flight of one, the confession of another, and the discovery of the codicil's fate in marginalia. Now, let us reconstruct the sequence of events, so that every heart here may comprehend fully how this drama unfolded." He placed the records upon the table and tapped the ledger page under its glass dome. First, Lady Margaret Clarendon, driven by maternal fear for her son's inheritance, removed the page dated June 12, 1892, which contained a codicil referring to a potential heir. She carried it to this very room, mended it clumsily with her late brother's naval thread, hence the anchor engraved thimble, and stained it intentionally with black coffee to mask part of its text. He paused to let the weight of the admission sink in. Lady Clarendon bowed her head. "I meant only to protect Edward." "Understandable," Poirot said gently. "Your impulses were noble, though misdirected. Next, you fashioned a second note in the style of Mrs. Farnsworth's handwriting, using lavender-scented stationery from your boudoir. The intention was to lure investigators into the rose garden, where you might re-hide the page more securely." He glanced at Mrs. Farnsworth, who inclined her head gravely. "Madame, you did not write that note, but your stationery was used." Poirot turned to Edward. "Meanwhile, Edward, you walked the gardens to calm your mind, inadvertently leaving footprints and smudged soil that later confused our inquiries." Edward offered a small nod of acknowledgement. "After these events," Poirot continued, "Barnaby Price seized the opportunity. He forged a letter under his own signet, addressed to Lady Clarendon, to pressure her into altering her will. He procured arsenic, mixed with coffee grounds drawn from the library's supply, to threaten or silence a witness. When suspicion fell upon him, he attempted flight, forcing open his study door and crushing his spare spectacles to delay pursuit." Poirot's gaze swept the room. "We intercepted him at the boathouse, where he had gone to burn letters that confirmed the Montfort connection and his own incriminating notes, preserved here." He indicated a small bundle on the side table, the recovered correspondence and Price's notebook. He leaned forward. "Yet all of these machinations sprang from a misunderstanding of one simple fact. The secret child named in that codicil died at 7 days old, nullifying any claim. That annotation, nearly erased by time, was rediscovered in the parish register and restored the rightful order of inheritance to Edward Clarendon." Lady Clarendon exhaled, relief and remorse mingling in her expression. I should have looked more carefully. Poirot smiled kindly. Hindsight offers clarity unknown in the moment. What matters is that the truth emerged, guided by calm reasoning and careful observation. He rose and addressed the entire company. You, mes amis, have witnessed how fear and greed can weave a web of deception, and how only by unraveling each thread, through patient inquiry, subtle tests of behavior, and the application of logic, can justice be served. Mrs. Granville stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, your insight into human nature, your little grey cells, has restored our peace. We owe you an immeasurable debt. Poirot inclined his head. It is enough that harmony returns to Clarendon Manor. I counsel you now to rebuild trust. Lady Clarendon with her son, Mr. Price, through restitution and atonement, and this household through renewed candour. He gestured to the tray of petit fours. Perhaps a shared treat will ease the final moment of tension. As tea and sweets circulated, I observed the transformation in the group's demeanour. Conversations began in tentative curiosity, questions about details, confessions of regret, but gradually warmed into genuine relief and even laughter at subdued recollections of the more theatrical misdirections, the coffee stain, the lavender note, the forensic knot. Poirot remained at the front, content to allow the household to reclaim its equilibrium. At last, he turned to me, a private twinkle in his eye. Mon ami, the game has ended. Our final gathering cements the bonds of truth stronger than any stitch or seal. I whispered back, remarkable, as always. He chuckled softly and murmured, it is the human heart that provides the greatest mysteries, and in solving them, peace is the sweetest prize. The sun sank low, bathing Clarendon Manor in amber. Within its walls, a family once rent by suspicion now stood united. And as the last of the petite fours vanished and the gentle hum of conversation filled the room, it was clear that the final gathering had not merely closed a case, it had mended the very fabric of trust, stitch by careful stitch. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Late that evening, as a gentle rain began to patter against the library windows, Poirot summoned the household for one final, formal revelation. The hearth fire glowed softly, casting a warm light upon the assembled faces. Lady Clarendon and Edward seated together at the centre, Mrs. Granville and Miss Bartram flanking them, and Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Farnsworth standing respectfully behind. Even the gardener's nephew, invited as a witness to the Montfort correspondence, hovered near the doorway. Each bore an expression of solemn anticipation. Poirot entered with deliberate grace, carrying a slender portfolio bound in green ribbon. He paused before the group, moustaches bristling with quiet authority. Mes amis, he began, we have retraced the labyrinth of deceit. The theft and dramatic mending of the ledger page, the forging of notes, the procurement of poison, and the attempted flight and destruction of evidence. Now, at last, I shall reveal the full tapestry of events, thread by thread, that led us here. He unfastened the ribbon and opened the portfolio, drawing forth copies of key documents. The marginally annotated parish register, the codicil from Sir Rowland's will, Barnaby Price's incriminating notebook, and Lady Clarendon's neatly folded second note. First, Poirot continued, we consider the heart of the matter, the codicil and its subject. On June 12th, 1892, a daughter of Sir Rowland Clarendon was born. Yet a faint annotation records her death on June 19th, 1892. Thus the codicil designed to provide for this child became void the moment she passed. No living heir ever existed beyond the known line. He placed the register upon the table. This fact, nearly erased by time, was hidden in a margin until our diligent examination. It dispels any notion of a surviving claimant. A murmur of relief swept the room. Lady Clarendon's shoulders relaxed. Edward's hand gripped hers gratefully. "Second," Poirot said, lifting the stitched ledger page. The page was stolen by none other than Lady Margaret Clarendon herself, driven by maternal terror that Edward's inheritance might vanish. She used her late brother's naval sewing kit, hence the distinctive anchor-engraved thimble and coffee grounds from the library to obscure critical lines, hoping to conceal the codicil until she gathered the courage to interpret its meaning. He tapped the page under its glass dome. Her fear, though understandable, led to deception. The crude stitching, the coffee stain, and the lavender-scented stationery all bore the imprint of her panic. Lady Clarendon bowed her head, tears glistening. "I accept full responsibility. I acted from love, not malice." "Third," Poirot said, drawing Price's notebook from the portfolio. Barnaby Price seized the chaos as an opportunity. He forged a letter under his own seal to pressure Lady Clarendon into revising her will in his favour, procured arsenic-laced coffee grounds to threaten or eliminate obstacles, and when suspicion fell upon him, attempted a desperate flight to the boathouse to destroy the letters and journals that chronicled his scheme. He held the notebook aloft. His own meticulous entries record each step, revealing premeditation and avarice rather than devotion or concern. Price, seated on a nearby settee under guard of a constable, lowered his gaze in shame. The weight of his ambitions laid bare. "Fourth," Poirot proclaimed, "the secondary misdirections. The forged note in Mrs. Farnsworth's hand that lured investigators into the rose garden, the feigned forgetting of the strong-room key, and the staged faults in the household log, all crafted to sow confusion and buy time." He handed the second note to Mrs. Farnsworth. She read the lines silently, her expression pained. "I did not write this," she whispered, "yet it bore my name." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, madame. The culprit abused your good name to divert attention." Finally, Poirot closed the portfolio and faced the company. "Thus, mes amis, the full picture emerges. A mother's misguided love catalyzed a series of ever-deepening deceptions which a calculating solicitor then exploited for personal gain. But it was the steadfast observation of small details, the nautical knot, the ribbon's fragrance, the marginal annotation, that enabled us to unravel the truth." He allowed a brief silence, letting the import of his words settle. Then he spoke with warmth and finality. "May we now lay these deeds to rest. Lady Clarendon, your confession honours your love. Monsieur Price, your admission shall lead to appropriate restitution, and to each of you present, servant and guest alike, I commend your patience and integrity under scrutiny." Lady Clarendon rose, her voice steady. "Monsieur Poirot, words fail me. You have guided us through shadows into light. Thank you." Edward stood and embraced his mother gently. Around them, tender relief replaced lingering tension. Poirot turned once more to me, his eyes gleaming. "Hastings, the little grey cells have triumphed. We have exposed every deception without resorting to force or spectacle, only through calm reasoning and attention to human frailty." He bowed to the assembled. "And now, mes amis, let us conclude this affair with empathy and understanding, for in truth revealed lies the path to forgiveness and peace." As the hush lifted, soft applause rose, a quiet tribute to the detective whose brilliance had brought them here. And outside, the rain ceased, leaving the world washed clean beneath a pale moon, its light promising a new chapter unmarred by secrets. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The following morning, Clarendon Manor awoke under a crisp, clear sky, as if nature itself sought to affirm that a new order had been restored. Over breakfast in the sunlit conservatory, the household settled into an atmosphere of calm relief, tempered by the knowledge that justice must now take its due course. Captain Hastings and I arrived promptly, exchanging brief nods as we entered the room. Lady Clarendon sat beside her son, Edward, whose posture was steady now that the codicil's shadow had been lifted. Mrs. Granville and Miss Bartram conversed quietly in a corner, while Mrs. Farnsworth and Mr. Thompson attended to the service with respectful reserve. "Hastings," Poirot remarked in a soft undertone, "today we oversee the formal consequences of yesterday's revelations. The authorities will arrive shortly to receive confessions and process the appropriate legal steps. Yet justice need not be harsh when tempered with understanding." I poured him a cup of tea. "Indeed, Poirot, there is sorrow here, but also redemption." He smiled gently. "Let us proceed." At 11 o'clock, a discreet carriage rolled up the driveway bearing the county magistrate, accompanied by 2 constables. They were shown into the drawing room, where Poirot awaited them with composed dignity. The magistrate, a stern yet kindly man in his 50s, bowed respectfully. "Mr. Poirot," he greeted, "I understand you have secured confessions from the principal parties involved in this curious affair." "Indeed, your worship," Poirot replied. "If you will permit, I shall recount the circumstances and present the evidence in full." Lady Clarendon rose, supported by Edward's gentle hand. She faced the magistrate with quiet resolve and spoke her confession clearly. "I, Margaret Clarendon, do solemnly acknowledge that on the evening of June 15th, 1925, I removed and then returned a page from the family ledger, seeking to conceal a codicil which I feared would disinherit my son. My actions, though misguided, were born of maternal love and not of malice." Poirot handed the magistrate the ledger page beneath its protective dome, along with the naval thimble and the lavender-scented stationery used to forge the second note. The magistrate examined each item thoughtfully. Next, Monsieur Barnaby Price was escorted forward. He stood with a posture less proud than the day before, eyes downcast. "I, Barnaby Price, solicitor to the Clarendon estate, confess that I forged a letter under my seal to coerce Lady Clarendon, procured arsenic to threaten a member of the household, and attempted to destroy correspondence proving my deeds. I accept responsibility and submit to the court's judgment." He laid his notebook, detailing every step of his conspiracy, upon the table. The magistrate leafed through it, brow furrowed. Poirot added the bundle of Montfort correspondence recovered from the boathouse, along with the parish register entry, confirming the death of the codicil's namesake child. The magistrate closed the register gently. "You have both provided full confessions and surrendered all evidence," he said gravely. "Your acts invoked the law, but your motives differ greatly. Lady Clarendon acted out of fear and love, Mr. Price from greed and ambition. The court will take these factors into account when pronouncing sentence." The magistrate paused, considering. Then he spoke, his tone measured. "Lady Margaret Clarendon, your crime, unauthorized removal of a private document and forging of a second note, is serious. Yet your genuine remorse and your motive to protect your son are mitigating factors. I hereby impose a fine of £500, payable to the estate for restoration of records, and 1 month's community service assisting in the public archives under supervision. Lady Clarendon bowed her head. "Thank you, Your Worship. I accept the sentence." He then turned to Barnaby Price. "Mr. Price, your crimes include forgery, attempted poisoning, and destruction of evidence. These are grave offences. However, your full admission and cooperation warrant clemency. I sentence you to 6 months' imprisonment with hard labour and restitution for damages to the Clarendon Estates Legal Fund." Price tightened his jaw and inclinated his head in acceptance. "I accept your worship's judgment." The magistrate rose. "May this service restore balance to this household and ensure the rule of law serves both justice and compassion." With that, he dismissed the gathering and departed with his constables. The room exhaled collective relief as the magistrate's carriage receded. Lady Clarendon sank into her chair, and Edward knelt beside her, offering comfort. Mrs. Granville laid a gentle hand on Margaret's shoulder, and Miss Bartram brought a handkerchief. Poirot stood quietly, observing the scene. Then he beckoned me. "Hastings, let us ensure that every article of evidence is returned to its rightful place, and that the ledger is restored to the strong room." We carefully replaced the ledger page, ribbon, and dome intact upon its shelf. The Montfort letters were handed to Mrs. Farnsworth, who placed them in the secure archives. The naval thimble returned to its display box, to be handled only by authorized family members. Later, as I walked with Poirot through the rose garden, now blooming robustly despite the recent turmoil, I remarked, "It seems the law balanced justice with mercy admirably." Poirot paused beside a crimson bloom. "Yes, Hastings, true justice does not merely punish, it restores harmony. Lady Clarendon's service will remind her gently of the weight of truth. Mr. Price's imprisonment underscores the severity of betrayal when entwined with greed, and the estate, purified of its ambiguities, may now flourish under Edward's rightful stewardship." He plucked a single rose petal and inhaled its fragrance. "Clarendon Manor has endured much upheaval, but it emerges stronger. The missteps born of fear and ambition have been laid bare. Now, with clarity restored, each may proceed with integrity." As the afternoon sun filtered through the broad leaves, we returned to the manor's steps. Lady Clarendon and Edward joined us at the terrace's edge. Edward offered his arm to his mother, who accepted it with gentle gratitude. "Mon ami," Poirot said softly, turning to me, "we leave Clarendon Manor with its secrets resolved and its future secure. The little grey cells have done their duty once more." I smiled, tucking my notebook away. "And peace has been restored." Poirot surveyed the fading roses. "Indeed. Now, Hastings, let us depart and ready ourselves for the next call of mystery, wherever it may arise." With that, we walked down the gravel path, the manor's facade bathed in soft light behind us. Within its walls, justice had found its balance, and those who remained faced a new day woven from truth, redemption, and the promise of honest tomorrows. Chapter 18. The Closing Remark. As the sun dipped low beyond the western terraces of Clarendon Manor, casting long shadows across its venerable stone facade, a peaceful stillness settled over the estate. In the library, scene of so many revelations and deceptions, the assembled household gathered one final time. Lady Margaret Clarendon, now free of fear's burden, stood beside her son Edward, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured. Mrs. Granville and Miss Bartram exchanged warm smiles of friendship. Mrs. Farnsworth and Mr. Thompson surveyed the room with quiet pride at having preserved both records and order. Even the gardener's nephew lingered, curiosity shining in his eyes. Into this circle stepped Hercule Poirot, his impeccably waxed moustaches bristling with satisfaction. In one gloved hand he carried his small valise, and in the other a single long-stemmed rose, picked from the very bed where the forged note had once beckoned investigators. He paused to let their gazes settle, then spoke in his distinctive, measured voice. Mes amis, our story reaches its natural conclusion. We have traced each thread of deception and each thread of devotion until the tapestry of truth lay bare before us. Yet every mystery must end not only in disclosure, but in reflection. Allow me, then, a few final observations. He laid the rose upon the low table, its crimson petals vivid against the dark wood. First, fear, even when born of love, can lead us astray. Lady Clarendon, you sought to protect Edward from imagined peril, and in doing so you compromised honesty. Yet your confession and your contrition teach us that courage to admit one's missteps is the true remedy for fear. Margaret Clarendon inclined her head, her eyes moist with gratitude. Second, ambition, unchecked by principle, reveals a heart more concerned for self than for justice. Monsieur Price, Poirot continued, glancing toward the corner where his former solicitor stood under quiet guard by the local constable, you exploited another's panic for personal gain, yet your cooperation and acceptance of consequence demonstrate that even the most wayward soul can find redemption through accountability. Price's bowed head was his only reply. Third, secrets are like buried seeds. They may sprout in unexpected ways long after they are sown. The codicil's secret child, whose life flickered for but 7 days, cast its shadow across decades. Only by tending carefully to every record, the ledger's stitching, the parish margins, the Montfort correspondence, could we discern that the seed never bore fruit and that no living heir awaited claim. At this, Miss Bartram gently touched the open parish register resting on a side table. Fourth, and finally, trust is the greatest treasure of any household. Each person here, the matron, her son, the neighbour, the governess, the servants, chose in the end to restore trust through truth. That choice rebuilds what fear and greed threatened to destroy. Poirot folded his hands behind his back and surveyed their faces, each reflecting relief, understanding, and renewed purpose. Then, with a characteristic flourish, he produced from his valise a small card bearing the crest of the Clarendon family. Permit me one last gift, a formal memorandum of this affair for your archives. It will record not only the crimes and the evidence, but also the lessons learned, so that future generations may know how the little grey cells brought clarity to confusion and how human frailty gave way to courage. He placed the card beside the rose, and a hush fell as Lady Clarendon accepted it with trembling hands. Edward, pride in his posture, helped her slip the card into the leather-bound ledger. Poirot stepped back, the faint smile of satisfaction lifting his lips. And now, mes amis, I shall take my leave. Rest assured that the truth of Clarendon Manor shall remain secure, and that harmony will flourish in place of doubt. May your days hence be guided by honesty, tempered by compassion, and ever mindful of the power of a single stitch. With that, he tipped his bowler hat and departed the library. Captain Hastings followed, the two detectives slipping into the dusk together, their silhouettes framed by the tall windows. Moments later, the household rose as one and moved to the wide front steps. They watched in respectful silence as Poirot and Hastings walked down the gravel path, then boarded their waiting motor car. The engine stuttered to life, lights glowed softly, and the car rolled away along the drive, leaving the manor's gates swinging gently in its wake. Inside, Lady Clarendon turned to Edward. "My son, we have much to rebuild, much to heal, but at least our path forward lies in the light of truth." Edward squeezed her hand. "Together, mother." Mrs. Granville placed a hand on Margaret's shoulder. "And you will have friends among us always." As the household drifted back into the warmth of the drawing-room, the final echo of the day's revelations settled like a benediction. And somewhere down the winding road, two figures crossed the threshold of one mystery and sped toward the next, ever guided by the enduring wisdom of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells.